All right, so we just covered warm outreach, and that was soup to nuts, what you need to do and immediately use to start making money and getting leads today, all right? Now, the next one is posting content. So I said there's core 4. What I did was I split posting content into 2 parts because it was honestly beefy enough that it felt like it'd be easier to consume. One is increasing the audience, the other one is monetizing the audience. With warm outreach, it tends to work a little bit more hand in hand, whereas posting content and monetizing content can somewhat happen separately. Even though it's still one of the core 4, I break it into 2 pieces. I just say that for clarity. All right, so let's dive in. So the second way that you can let people know about your stuff is by letting many people know at the same time. All right, so these are people who know you and letting many of them know publicly all at once. All right, so we are here on the core 4. And so let's break it down. So quick story. This is kind of crazy, but you can see this, the 8th episode of my podcast, The Game, which is July 14th, 2017. I have an episode called Stop Branding. And then you can fast forward to today, or recently. I said, the longer I do business, the longer I believe in a single truth, that brand is more important than everything. And there's a huge transition that's happened over that period of time. The big step that happened there was I saw The Rock launch his tequila and overnight have a multiple billion-dollar company. I saw Conor McGregor launch his Proper 12 and have a $600 million exit within 12 months. I saw Huda Beauty also have a $600 million exit just from an Instagram page. Prime Water with Logan and Jake Paul and KSI did, I think, $250 million in internal revenue in the last quarter. And so I used to think that, it sounds ridiculous, but like content was a waste of time and all you had to do was run paid ads and do outbound, right? Talk to people, run ads, sell shit. But the longer I've been doing business, and now that I have been doing it this way, I can feel pretty confident in saying that I didn't get it. And when Kylie, and like the most pivotal moment was when Kylie Jenner was on the cover of Forbes and she was a billionaire and she was a girl and she was younger than me. And I felt really deficient. I was like, shit, I thought I was all that and a slice of cheese, but I wasn't, because this girl is doing what, beating the pants off of me, and she's way younger than I am. Now, whether or not she was a billionaire, which ended up getting flipped later, didn't really matter. She had made a ton of money, and I always had this fundamental belief that if anyone makes more money than you, they have something that you can learn from them in the world of business. And I want to also be clear that just because you learn from someone doesn't mean you become them. So I think that you can see something that someone does and take elements of it and make it your own without becoming that person. So there are terrible people, there are great people, and there are still benefits from anyone. And so that's how I try to approach this. And when I saw all these people beating me, I was like, I'm missing something. And what I was missing was brand. And as soon as that clicked, weeks later, I started making content. And that's what has brought me here today. And I can tell you, even though I'm new in this game, how crazy of a game changer it is. And I know that I've been doing it wrong up to this point. And so this is one of the pillars that I'd encourage you to build as a long-term play. You're still gonna do the other things to transact, but this becomes an asset that will make every other type of advertising work better. Consider it like the massive multiplier on all the work you do. So that's my quick story for how I got into content and how I decided that branding actually was a thing. And I tell that story because I didn't used to think that. And so I am a convert to the world of branding and making content. So here's how it works fundamentally. You are here, you provide free value of some kind to your audience, and then they want more of it. All right, so posting content equals a more scalable way than warm outreach. And here's an important point. At some point when you're doing warm outreach, you will run out of time. And so you have to tell 10 people 10 times if you want to communicate something with warm outreach. With posting content, you can tell 10 people or 10,000 people or 10 million people with the same level of effort, which means it has more leverage, it has more scale, but it takes more skill because you're also competing against everybody else that's also trying to tell everyone else something at the same time. And in addition to that, if you do a really good job of it, other people will copy your stuff, which means you always have to innovate how you're making content. And so not only is it more competitive, you also have to innovate on a constant basis in order to stay ahead. And so it is a harder skill, but if you get good at it, you only get good at it by doing more of it for a long period of time, you will eventually get more from your brand than you can from any single person doing warm outreach. Now that being said, you can also have an army of people doing warm outreach, which we'll get to in the second half of the training. So here are the pros. Content will grow your warm audience, which is also people you can reach out to. So if you grow the audience with your content, you have more people you can reach out to. So that grows your list of leads. All right, so if more people follow me on Instagram, I can DM all of them who followed me. They've shown interest in the stuff I sell, right? Right, so these things can work together. And that's kind of the whole idea of this stuff, is that this is an ecosystem of advertising that you want to eventually build. And if you're like, man, how do I do this all at once? You don't. You do one, you get good at it. And I want you to think in years for this stuff, because this is a decade of putting this together. So like if you're in your first 6 months or first couple of years, like you might only do 1 or 2 of these things, and that will be enough for you to probably make more money than you ever made. All right. So number 2 is that it makes all their advertising more effective, which is one of the pros here. Number 3 is it costs time. All right. That's it. So it doesn't cost money, and it can get you some of the highest return per dollar. Because if you make one viral video and it goes nuts, all of that exposure is free. All right. So that is some of the biggest pros of content. Now the cons is that it's more difficult to personalize. Right? With an outreach message, I can ask Cindy how her kids are doing, I can ask Larry how his business is doing, and I can get both of them to respond. With content, I can only make one and hope I hit both of them. Right? So it becomes less personalized. Second, you compete with everyone, which makes it difficult to stand out. And then finally, if you're good, people copy you, and you have to always change. Now, the fundamental unit of making content, I call the content unit. Talking to some of the best content creators on the planet, and just me looking at my own stuff, there are 3 units that I've seen repeat. People use different names for them, and the names are not nearly as important as the function. So number 1 is that every piece of content has a hook. It gives the person a reason to consume it, gets them to notice it. That is the hook. That is the point of the hook. They don't notice it, and they don't have a reason to consume it, they won't consume it. So that is the first thing that has to happen. The second is that we need to retain them, which means we need to get them to pay attention long enough to get value from it. We need to get them to consume it. The third is that if we get them to consume it, then we need to reward them for consuming it, because otherwise they won't consume anything else again. And so we need to satisfy their reason for consuming. Now, a content unit has those 3 steps. Those can happen on a long basis or on a short basis, and every piece of content has micro-content units spliced throughout. And a content unit can be as short as a meme. An image is a content. It has a hook, is a retain, and a reward all at once. And so even though some of these things can all happen simultaneously, I break them apart for explanation. There you go. It's like I wrote these, all right? But I'll break each of the components apart so you can look at them a little bit better. So let's talk about hooks. The objective here is to give them the reason to redirect their attention from whatever they are doing, because they were doing something else prior to that moment, towards us. That is the objective of the hook. You're here, I catch your attention, and I've redirected it. All right? And so the goal is that we get lots of people to pay attention by doing 3 things well. 1 is that we pick good topics that they find interesting. 2 is we pick good headlines that give them a reason. And 3 is we match the format that has rewarded them in the past. And so I'll break down each of these. So from a topics perspective, these are the 5 ways that I think about making topics for my content. This is the framework I use, and maybe it'll help you. Is that the biggest kind of category is far past. All right, so these are life lessons. These are things that have changed my behavior. So I used to think this. What I gave you at the beginning of this, that story about how I came about thinking about brand, that was a life lesson for me. Like, how did I come to that? I didn't think it mattered. I did ads and cold outreach. I thought that's all that mattered. And then all these people were making more money than me, and I said, oh, they must know more than I do. I learned from them. I started doing it. I succeeded more, right? Simple story. But that was a lesson, and that was a topic. And so I could make a whole video around that, but that is one example of how topics work. That would be a way to hook people. The second is that you use something from your recent past. So for me, when I think about how do I make stuff interesting, I pull up my calendar, I look at my day, or I look at my last week, and I look at all the different things that I did. And I think, oh yeah, I had that conversation with Jono. And Jono was saying X, Y, and Z. Oh, I had that conversation with Nick, and he slept with that coworker when he was opening that thing. Wow, that's crazy, right? And so I think about all these scenarios that I went through, and then I make content about them, right? And so we all live lives, and we all have interesting things. We just don't take the time to look back at them. So if you just think about it, and you look back at just your micro calendar, I promise you, there are things that other people would find interesting. And if you don't know what they find interesting, then just talk about all of them, and then the audience will tell you what they find interesting. And you do more of that. The third is present, so real-time capture. So if you've ever followed me on Twitter, what I used to do for years, before I found out Twitter existed, was that I would email myself like interesting stuff, right? And so I'd be like, Drew is really good around the camera. Man, it's great to have people who know how to use a camera. And so I would email that, and I'd think, okay, well, maybe I'll make a content about how great it is to have a team and how people who like positively affirm you while you're doing stuff so that you're more encouraged to keep doing it, right? And that might be a piece of content. And it's just an email to myself. So as it's happening, I try and document it. A big advancement for me was doing that in Twitter so that my ideas became tested. And so in real time, because Twitter will encourage, you can post 20 times a day there and it doesn't penalize you. And so for me, I can test ideas in real time as they come up. And then when I do get to recording long form stuff, I look through my Twitter. So my Twitter acts like as another calendar that I scroll through to see, oh, that was interesting. Oh, people found that fascinating. I'll do more about that. Fourth type of topic that I look at when I put my lens on is what are the trends that apply to something that I have expertise on. And I think that second part is really important. If I just talk about some scandal, like, I don't have expertise on that. I don't know anything about that. I also think it reflects poorly on my brand. And so I'm only going to talk about something if it's like, there's a new tax bill that affects, small to mid-sized business owners, who have between 10 and 100 employees. That would be something I have a lot of expertise on. And so I will comment on how we are approaching it as a firm. And that would be, now it would be trends, and it doesn't fall in any of these categories, but a lot of people would be curious as to what would an expert or somebody who's doing this right now have to say about this? Because I hear the news on one hand, but this guy's actually doing it. He probably has a valuable or interesting insight. And then they pay attention. And then fifth is manufactured. And so this is the crazy stuff you see on YouTube all the time. Like, I ate the world's hottest chip, right? I lived on $100 a month for a year, right? These are all crazy things, and then you basically manufacture them. So you actually think in reverse, like, what would be something that a lot of people would find interesting, and then I will go do it and document it. Now, I will say for me personally, we do the first four. I don't do the fifth much, but some people do, and I've included it for completeness, all right? And so my favorite way to pick topics, by the way, is do shit and talk about what you did and then repeat. So that's how you get topics that people will find interesting. Just talk about the stuff you do. And if you need to do more stuff, then do more stuff. And maybe that's the lesson, all right? Number two is pick good headlines. This gives them a reason to do it or to consume it. So the nice thing is that there's been a huge amount of research that's been done on headlines, but they just don't call it headlines in the normal sense. It's actually done on media and the news. And so I found this old study. My friend Dr. Kashi, my good friend Dr. Kashi, showed me this thing, and it was a meta-analysis of all news to show which headlines performed the best. And they found 7 characteristics of high-performing headlines. And so rather than give you some formula like how to yay without boo or how to X without Z, whatever it is, I just want you to understand the pieces of it so that you can mix and combine them for yourself in your own way, which will make your headlines unique and powerful. So, number one is that people want things that are recent, all right, as recent as possible. Quite literally, the news. Like, we call it the news, but it was called the news because it was new stuff, right? And so people pay attention to something that happened an hour ago more than a year ago. Think about it. If I said, hey, I just did this thing, or hey, this just happened, that is more interesting than this happened 5 years ago. It's just not as interesting. If you see a YouTube video that's 5 years ago and 2 hours ago, you're more interested in even if it's the same topic, you'll be more likely to click that. Or you go for a tutorial, if it says 10 years ago, you're not going to click on it. It's just more interesting by being recent, which also tells you that you should continue to make stuff, even if it's about the same topic. Number two, relevancy. So personally meaningful. All right, so nurses pay more attention to stuff that affects nurses compared to stuff that affects accountants, right? And so if you make it relevant for the audience, you will have headlines that convert higher. So if your audience is about moms, then talk about stuff that affects moms, not about stuff that affects dads, right? Sounds simple, but still people miss it when they're making the headlines for their content. Third, celebrity. Again, these are the things that made all news more interesting. All right, and I'm going to combine these all at the end so you can see how crazy it is. 3 is celebrity. So including prominent people, celebrities, authorities, etc. So normally, we wouldn't care what another human has for breakfast every day. But if it's Jeff Bezos, we do. Or if it's Elon Musk, we do. Since he's a celebrity, many people care. Simply by it being about a celebrity, a boring thing can become interesting. Number 4 is proximity. So literally close to home, geographically. Like a house on fire across the country doesn't get your attention. If it's your next door neighbor, it sure does. All right? So you want to make it as close to home, literally, as possible. Number 5 is conflict. So opposing ideas, opposing people, nature. So pineapple versus no pineapple on a pizza. Obviously, it's pineapple. All right? Good versus evil, hero versus villain, left versus right, freedom versus security, justice versus mercy. There are natural conflicts that are eternal. So these are both values. So like mercy and justice, they're both ideals, but they actually sit in contrast to one another, which is why, by the way, we will always have political division. Because both people can sit in an ideal, and the other person can't prove it's wrong, and so they would just sit there. Is it right to have justice? Absolutely. Is it right to have mercy? Absolutely. But they sit on complete opposite side of the spectrum, and that's why we have conflict. But conflict drives interest. And so when we have headlines, we try and put opposing ideas together to show that there's conflict, all right? 6, unusual, odd, unique, bizarre, rare, etc. So think of a 6-fingered man at old-time circuses. People went to go pay just to see it because it was so rare. So if you find something that's odd, like 1 in a million basketball shot, it's It's not like basketball shooting in of itself is unique. It's the fact that they made this 6 bouncy thing go into the hoop that takes 1,000 tries to get that one. And so the ROI on your time of not having to see the 999 misses just to see the one shot is very high, right? And so they package that value of the time you don't have to spend, and then the video goes viral. And then finally, ongoing stories. So stories that are still in progress, that are dynamic, so ever evolving and have plot twists, which is why when there's something going on, the news updates minute by minute. Like, we have coverage from live reporter. Like, that's because people find it interesting. All right? So if someone goes into labor, people want updates every 10 minutes because anything could happen. And so when we combine these 7 things, you'd have something that happened just now, is really relevant to someone, also include a celebrity, right? It's right next to their house, and there's some conflict that's going on, and it's really one of a kind, and it's happening as we speak ongoing. How interesting would that be? Incredible. You would have everyone's attention. And that's how you make headlines that people find interesting. And so finally, and this is again for the hook, the third thing is that we want to match the format that's rewarded them before, okay? And so this image probably does more than I could possibly say, but you probably saw this meme years ago where it was like, okay, this is what your profile picture looks like on LinkedIn, this is what it looks like on Facebook, what it looks like on Instagram, what it looks like on Tinder, right? And so each of those actually has a little bit of a story in that it's formatted differently. Each platform has a way that people conduct, that there's unspoken rules about how to use the platform. And they emerge and they evolve culturally, like even within the microsphere of the platform, the community. And so paying attention to how the platform works and then making your content look like content that has rewarded them in the past makes them more likely to generalize that reward to yours. Meaning, if last time I clicked a meme, I laughed, I will be more likely to click a meme that looks or resembles that one. Like, I love dark Kermit memes. I almost read all of them because I think they're hilarious. And so I always click. And so if someone makes a new meme for dark Hermit, I think that's what it's called, but you know what I'm talking about. Either way, if someone makes that, I'm actually much more likely to watch it because it resembles something that's rewarded me in the past. And so when we make content on a platform, we want to make it as similar to high-performing content. So if you look at a platform, see the stuff that's crushing, and say, how do I make mine look like that? It doesn't have to be that. You don't want to copy it. You just want to say it should resemble it so that someone can generalize and say, this is close enough. This might reward me too. And then they click. And so this is what the same thing looks like in 3 different versions. So this is the same video done on Instagram Reels, TikTok, and then YouTube Shorts. And you can see how each of them is a little bit different because they're formatted to match the way people are accustomed to consuming the content on the platform. All right? So you got to make it look like what they expect will reward them. Otherwise, no matter how good it is, better looking content will hook them before yours even has a chance. And that's why I told that story at the beginning. That first 5 seconds, we had to format it for the platform. And then it crushed. And so it's not just about having the best stuff, it's about making sure it's packaged the right way. So that is how we hook the most people in the first step of our content unit. The second step is that now we have their attention. Great, we've redirected their attention towards our thing. Now we got to deliver, right? So we have to retain them through this. We have to retain through curiosity, all right? So people want to know what happens next. So here are my 3 favorite ways of actually structuring content to retain people. You've got lists, you've got steps, you've got stories. You can even see this content. Look, what are we doing? We've got steps. That's what we're doing. I'm trying to retain you. Here's showing my tricks inside of my jacket, right? Lists, steps, and stories. All right, so let's dive into each of these. So lists are things, facts, tips, opinions, ideas, etc., presented one after the other. Good lists in free content also follow a theme, right? This one is how to post content, right? That's the theme of this list. So think top 10 mistakes, 5 biggest money makers, how to make content, for example, and so on. Giving the number of listed items in your headline or in the first few seconds of your content tells people what to expect. And in my experience, this retains more of an audience's attention longer. All right, so an example here. 7 ways I invested $1,000 in my 20s that paid off big. Example, 28 ways to stay poor. Example, a content unit has 3 pieces, right? So those are lists. The second way is steps. All right, steps are actions that occur in order to accomplish a goal when completed. So provided the early steps were clear and valuable, the person will know how to do them all and accomplish the overall goal. So if I say there's 38 steps to selling a house, if I make the first one clear, they're going to want to know the second, and they're going to know all the rest of them so that they can sell their house. So example, 3 steps to creating a great hook, which we went over. Example, how I create headlines in 7 steps, which we went over. Example, the morning routine that boosts my productivity. okay? These are all steps. So hopefully you understand the difference between steps and lists. So here it is. Steps are actions that must be done in a specific order to get a result. So steps are less flexible, but have more explicit reward, meaning if you do this thing, you get this outcome. Lists can have just about anything in them in any order that you want. So lists are more flexible, but typically have less explicit reward for consuming all of them. Like I could consume 4 money-saving tips, not consume the other 8, and still get value from them. Doing the first 4 of a 12-step list might not get me as much value as doing the whole list. And so there's less explicit reward for completion. Harder to do and less flexible for steps, but that's the trade-off. And then finally, you have stories, okay? So stories describe events, real or imaginary, and stories worth telling often have some lesson or takeaway for the listener. All right, so you can tell stories about things that have happened, might happen, or will never happen. And all 3 drive curiosity because people want to know what happens next. And we're like, well, why would I want to hear about a story that will never happen? Ever heard of Star Wars? Ever heard of Lord of the Rings? Like, these are all things that will never happen. Now, part of you are like, I hope it happens. And believe me, me too. I hope it happens, right? So maybe that might happen, all right? But you get the idea, is that fiction fundamentally is stuff that will never happen, likely. But people still want to know how the story ends, all right? And so, example, almost every section in this training has a story. And I do that because I want to get your attention. And I also want to show you what it looks like in real life. A second example is that my editor made me do 19 drafts of this book, and here's what I did to him, which is true. I did have 19 drafts of the book, and I almost killed him. The third example is my journey from sleeping on the bottom floor of a gym to the top floor of a 5-star hotel. That shows a rags to riches story. That's interesting. People are like, how did that happen, right? And so people want to know what happens next. If I tell the first part of the story, they're like, well, then what, right? And you retain them. They're curious. The best part is you can use all 3 of these at the same time because you have seen me throughout this training tell stories, give you lists, and put steps to complete these actions. And so you can interweave stories, lists, and steps all throughout to keep your audience longer. So ideally, so that you can help deliver value that you ultimately promise them. So great, we know how to hook them, we know how to retain them, and finally, we have to reward them, right? Has anyone ever seen one of these people who like continually open loops their audience? They're like, but wait, there's more, and then there's thing, but they never complete it. They will get somebody to watch all the way through once, and then never come back again. And the thing that gives you the long-term increase in click-through rates and people who want to stop, consume your thing, go off volume, and actually listen to it and really consume and engage is that the last time they did it, they were rewarded. So it gets, once your brand is strong enough that you rewarded them enough times, people just always stop when they see your thing. And then in general, over time, all your content performs better because your brand starts to get built because you have a reputation of delivering. So, reward. How good your content is depends on how often it rewards your audience and the time it takes them to consume it. So think value per second. All right? So an example is the same person who gets bored 3 seconds into a 10-second video might also binge a 900-page book. And that same person may binge a television series for 8 hours straight. So there's no such thing as too long, only too boring. And so a lot of people like to make these extreme things like everything's short now. Have you seen how people are consuming Netflix? It's not that. My opinion, so I'm interjecting here, I actually believe that the competition for attention has just raised. The bar is higher. So it's not that people have shorter attention spans, they have higher standards. Because there's so many other places they can look to get a reward for their attention that they're just not satisfied with mediocrity. I mean, people used to sit around the radio as a family and listen to it. Why doesn't that happen anymore? Our bodies haven't changed. We haven't evolved, in 50 years, not really. We're the same. Our environment has changed. And since the environment has changed, so too has our behavior. So we just have to make sure that we're better than everybody else that is competing for their eyeballs. So we can't guarantee a specific reward because you can't actually get someone to feel rewarded by something. So for example, I'll give you a simple example. If I said, hey, here's a cookie, generally speaking, that might reward a lot of people. But if someone just had 12 cookies and they're stuffed out of their mind, the idea of an additional cookie sounds pretty terrible, right? And so the fact that we present a cookie doesn't necessarily mean that we have rewarded the audience, but we can do things that increase the likelihood that they experience a reward. I just want to make sure that I explain the difference there. And so we can increase the chance that reward occurs, that they're positively reinforced for watching our stuff by 1, hooking the right audience with the proper topics, headlines, and formatting. We get the right people to watch our stuff. Second is that we retain them. We get them actually consume it with list steps and stories that get them curious and wanting more. And then we clearly satisfy, number 3, the reason the content hooked them to begin with. So if I said, here's 6 ways to grow your dental practice, and then I give them 5, They might not feel satisfied. Or I give them 6 and they all suck, or they're all obvious, then they didn't gain anything. So what happened is they cost them time and they got no reward. And so the likelihood they consume something else from that person in the future, very low, right? Unless I have some incredibly interesting topic that they think maybe this time he'll get it right. Who knows? But the idea is if we crush it on those 6, the next time I say 5 ways to hire a receptionist, that guy's gonna watch. And so, there you go. See, bad example. 7 ways to make up with your spouse, and you give 4 ways. That sucks. Or 7 ways that stunk, or they've heard them all before. Or you're talking to a room of single guys who don't have spouses, right? That's why the right audience is important. Then you did a bad job of rewarding. And so people will not want to watch again and certainly won't share it, which is ultimately what grows your brand, okay? That's the idea. So how to know if your stuff is good? 1, no matter how good your content is, it is the audience that ultimately decides. Number 2, rewarding your audience means matching or exceeding their expectations when they decide to consume your content. That's what it means. You make a promise, you keep the promise. You make a promise, you keep the promise. You do that enough times, people will start to take your promises as gold in and of itself. They'll be like, because I know that if I take his promise, I know I will get this result. Number 3, here's how you know if you succeeded. Your audience grows. If it's not growing, then your stuff isn't that good. Just being real. It's not the algorithm that hates you. It's not any of that stuff. It's just not that good. Comma, and that's okay, right? Practice and you'll get better. And how do you practice? You do more, right? And you look at feedback and you improve. And then 4 is that if you provide more value than everyone else and you make good on your promises, clearly satisfy the hook that you use to get their attention, your audience will grow. That is a promise. And so that is hook, retain, and reward. And I want to add this little caveat here because I get a ton of questions about this, which is, okay, so I understand the content unit, but like, how does that work with like long form YouTube and podcasts and then short form and then tweets and blogs? There's so many different places that we can make content, all right? Well, a content unit is the smallest base unit that hooks, retains, and rewards. A long piece of content is simply many of those things strung together. Just like in a story of Lord of the Rings or something, there's multiple story arcs that are happening. There's side quests, there's character stories, character development stories, there's the total plot of the entire narrative. All of these things are opening and closing at any time. And so the hook, retain, reward, if you have drop-off points in a book, it's because there's not enough hook, retain, reward that's really retained, that's pulling them through. They don't have enough story arcs that are driving them to the next thing. They're not even curious about what happens next. They would just rather consume something else that has a higher likelihood of rewarding them, all right? So long content is simply put, more content units. Short content is fewer content units. That's it. And so it takes more skill to reward a lot over a longer period of time. So my recommendation is start with short and then build from there. If you can learn how to retain someone for 5 seconds, you'll be able to use that to retain them for 15 seconds. And it's the same reason comedians start with 5-minute bits and then work up to a full hour-long routine or segment over a year or 2. Because they string together a few 1-minute jokes, 1-minute jokes, 1-minute jokes, until eventually they have 60 minutes of 1-minute jokes that can retain the widest audience for the longest period. That's how I think about building content and building your skill set of creating content. And here's a little content tip that you didn't ask for that you probably still want. Make all your content for strangers, okay? So one of the worst things, ever been to a party and a bunch of people are joking and then you're like, you walk into the circle and they sell some inside joke and they're like, you had to be there. And you're like, okay, like, cool, got it. I'm the out man, I'm not in the in-group. You want the opposite of that with your content. So if you're always making content specifically for your audience, as in it references past content that a new person wouldn't know about, without explaining what it means or giving the context, then they're not gonna feel rewarded. They're gonna feel like the odd man out. And so what you wanna do, in my opinion, is make all your content for someone who's brand new. And people who've already consumed your stuff are okay with the few, the 5-second disclaimer, the hey, by the way, if you're new to this channel, XYZ, that's okay. They're not gonna stop watching you as long as you're still providing value. But for the new person who's walking in, it can make all the difference in the world, all right? And so the reason you do this is it grows your audience faster. The existing audience won't mind, and the new audience will want to feel included. And then they will if you make them feel included. All right? And so that concludes the post-content section. And you might be like, okay, I get it. The content unit, and I need to post a ton of content, and hook, retain, reward, and long is lots of them, and short is shorter of them, and I should make it for new people. Awesome. How do I make money again? Well, that leads us to the second half of this. And in the book, it's a separate chapter, which is why I divided it out here. It's still the same core 4, which is posting content. Now we're just going to talk about monetizing it.